Hello and welcome to the President's Podcast right here on The Record with the Ohio Senate. The views the news excludes. I'm the Director of Communication for the Senate Republican Caucus, the majority caucus in the Ohio Senate. Welcome back. I'm John Fortney. Joining us today, great to have back on the program, State Senator Andrew Brenner, Republican from Delaware, Ohio. Delaware County, Ohio. Great to have you back on.
Thank you.
We had the Senate President on last week, talked about Issue 1, the defeat of Issue 1. I want to get your thoughts about post-election thoughts, but specifically about the defeat of Issue 1 being up against a $37 million dark money funded, out-of-state funded campaign.
I think the grassroots of the Republican Party came out. We literally, myself, all the legislators who are on the Republican side, led by Senate President Huffman and others, got the message out to the grassroots. They started spreading the message around. That this is about the Democrats taking over the General Assembly. It has nothing to do about fair districts. It has nothing, in fact, it has everything to do with their controlling gerrymandering. And I think once we got that message out, that helped. Clearly, President Trump, his endorsement of saying vote no on this helped. I think the ballot language helped a bit because it said what the ballot language actually did, which was required gerrymandering. It just changed the formula. And I think once the message reached the general public, it resonated to a no vote. I will say, even going into that, I wasn't certain whether or not we were going to defeat it by a couple points or not. I thought it was going to be close either way. And the fact that it was, I think, almost 7.5 or 8 points loss, that sent, I think, a big signal that especially that these out-of-state funds, if they're going to come into Ohio, they're going to be up against a little more than just some money. They're going to be up against a grassroots team and an effort.
Right, and I thought Jim Province in his report really summed it up really well after Election Day from the Toledo Blade. He said the campaign behind the proposed reform of how Ohio redraws political districts had more than $37 million in its pockets from across the country. It had big labor and the Democratic, Libertarian, and Green parties behind it, the endorsement of every major newspaper in the state, and a near record of petition signatures. It was fronted by 2 former Ohio Supreme Court justices, and it failed on Tuesday. Isn't it interesting that every major newspaper in the state basically ignored who was funding this campaign and said, we need to get this passed, and the voters sent the major newspapers a message?
Well, I think clearly the newspapers are backed by far-left progressives at this point in the state of Ohio, whether we like it or not. And I was actually going on social media and countering them. I'm saying, look, okay, it says editorial board. Well, the editorial board consists of 2 or 3 people usually on their board who are of one political mindset, and it's almost always the Democrat or far-left mindset. So when they're coming out as an editorial board, it's like, okay, it's 2 or 3 people are wanting you to vote, for it. And I think that just even trying to get that message out, and now with, alternative forms of messaging like these podcasts, I think this is helping, open up people's eyes and giving them alternative viewpoints that they weren't able to see before.
And maybe that is something that these progressive left candidates and campaigns and contributors need to keep in mind, that people are smart, voters are smart, they're not fooled by campaign ads, and that now, as you see on X, I had a laugh where Elon Musk was posting on the X platform that I'm the media now, or you're the media now. You, the user, are the media. And people are smart and savvy about how to use these platforms.
Absolutely. And what I find even funnier is a bunch of the far left actors are now leaving the X platform, or even people on the Washington Post. Well, we don't want to be on here. Well, okay, you're going to make yourself even less relevant than you were before. At least, and I don't have a problem if somebody disagrees with me. They go on a social media platform. But when you're doing something or saying something, be truthful. And that was the other thing about State Issue 1. I'm sorry, to say this is fair districts and not gerrymandering was lying to the public, and I think even the independents, because that's clearly where these numbers came from to vote no. I think they took a look at that and said, wait a minute, this is not what you're claiming it is. I think there would be people that would be interested in doing something similar to what they were suggesting, but not what they actually were proposing. And lastly, I found it interesting. I actually voted on Election Day. I go into my voting place, and I see the 20-some pages of the actual amendment up there on the wall, I think a lot of people also, when they think of a constitutional amendment, they think of, a 2 or 3 sentence or a 1 or 2 paragraph amendment, not something that looks like is a long-winded legislation which may have lots of issues with it. And I think if people saw that, and I actually had a couple constituents mention that they'd gone into the polling place and didn't realize how big that amendment was until they saw it up on the board. So those types of things, I think, helped immensely in defeating issue 1.
And before we leave the whole idea of redistricting, of course, the General Assembly under Article 19 that was passed by 75% of the voters in 2018 will be employed and instituted to draw a new map for Ohio's congressional districts. And I was talking to a reporter from Cleveland.com this past week who was asking about proportionality. And I made it clear that proportionality is not even a consideration, of course, and should not be, as passed by the voters in drawing the congressional map, where it was simply an aspirational shall attempt to, under Section 6 of Article 11, which is the General Assembly map process and the Redistricting Commission, because if proportionality is the foundational criteria as it was for issue 1, that is what creates the sprawling, divided communities, sprawling districts that the League of Women Voters, as I like to call them, the League of Liberal Misinformation, and all these other so-called fair districts groups campaigned against. They were all against. Why do these districts, the snake on the lake, the duck, everything else? But that's what proportionality gets you. And trying to have a 10-year look back and put a formula and a percentage and an algorithm on top of a map that outlines congressional or other General Assembly districts really is an inappropriate comparison, because people want their districts to be compact communities of interest. Would you agree with that? I mean, feel free to disagree, but to me...
I supported that in 2018. In fact, my old district, my old Senate District 19, went into Franklin County, and it was a gerrymandered mess down here. I had Democrats complaining about, oh, your district is safe, but then I pointed out actually that even the ones that the Democrats proposed for their districts were actually even more Republican than the one that I'm in now that we actually approved, or that was actually approved by the apportionment board. So they claimed that they wanted, to hold communities together, but I think that was, again, a ploy on their part. I don't think that they had any intention of doing that. I think that this idea of the Citizens Commission was, no, we know that we're going to be able to control that Citizens Commission, and we're going to be able to draw the lines the way we want to. And even when you had people from Michigan who were running that one that they had passed up there and said, please, this is a bad idea, don't do it, and they're coming down here to Ohio and telling us not to, I think that's a strong indication that the current system is far better than what they were proposing. Could this current system be tweaked some? Yes, I think we could always do that. And I would be open to something as long as it was, in fact, fair. But it's got to be fair to all concerned. I'm a Rotarian. Just because somebody says it's fair doesn't mean it's fair to everybody. And I think that's what people and what I think the voters would be more preferable to looking at.
Before I leave the November election, what is the impact, do you think, of having a vice president, the next vice president of the United States of America, being from Ohio?
It's huge. I think that clearly shows that Ohio, again, is still a major player, even though I think we have definitely turned into a red state, and that's been clear from some of the other votes. But the fact that J.D. Vance, he's articulate, he's well-spoken, he's thoughtful, and he is somebody who I think represents Ohio well. I've talked to people all over the district, even the people who didn't necessarily like J.D. Vance. I think they even realize that, this guy's smart, he is articulate, and I think he'll do a really good job as our vice president. And I think it bodes well for Ohio.
Yes, and it'll be an interesting time to see if, as we like to say, if they're going to be able to drain the swamp or limit or downsize bureaucracy in Washington, D.C., which would provide an interesting level of efficiency that hasn't been around for at least the last 4 years.
Oh, and the fact that you've got Vivek Ramaswamy right here from, Columbus area and Upper Arlington, he's going to be working with Elon Musk for the new Department of Government Efficiency. I love that Doge, going back to Elon Musk's his own version of Dogecoin. But the fact is, I think they can go in and do a lot of streamlining. It's needed. The bureaucracies have just been overly bloated in the federal level, and then they bring a lot of problems to our state level. So I think it's been a long time coming.
Lame duck is underway,
Yep.
the end of the 135th General Assembly. I guess maybe just an explainer. You've been in the General Assembly for several years now. Lame duck is exactly what?
Basically, it's the time of period after the election to whenever we're sworn in the next General Assembly. It's about a 45-day window, and we can pass bills that have been sitting there or introduce bills and move them. It's a period of time that can be chaotic. It's a period of time that anything can theoretically happen. I've been around long enough to know to say that the stuff that people are always worrying about never seems to really ever happen. We will be moving some bills, I think, that we said we were going to move, and one example was House Bill, or Senate Bill 104, my own bill with Senator Jerry Serino, was College Credit Plus. The House added, I believe it was House Bill 183. It was the one to help protect girls in bathrooms and boys in bathrooms, and that bill was added. We concurred on it. People said, well, this was the first priority. Well, no, actually, the House had sent us the bill back after we had gone on recess right before the summer break. So this was one of the first bills that was available to be voted on. We voted on it.
You mean you weren't attacking transgender rights? Because if you look at all the legacy media headlines and coverage of this, Dispatch, Ohio Senate passes bill to restrict bathroom access for transgender students. Ohio Associated Press, bill on school bathroom use by transgender students. Clears Ohio legislature, heads to the governor. And it is so slanted, but I thought your release that came out said the following was spot on. At the House Bill 183 addressed the concern from many Ohio parents about their local schools allowing the opposite sex into shared restrooms or locker rooms, said Brenner. Quote, I support protecting women and our daughters by simply providing the specific facilities reserved for them.
And that's what this is about. I find it interesting that this was not an issue 10 years ago. Everybody knew that boys went to boys' bathrooms and locker rooms, and girls went to girls' bathrooms and locker rooms. And yes, there were transgender kids then. But this has only become an issue, I think, because the far extreme left, progressive, socialists want to disrupt our system, and they're making this issue bigger than it needs to be. But I also think it's because we've had a lot of bad science. And it's causing a lot of kids to question their sexuality today that weren't questioning it before. And that's because I think these alleged experts who even, and I mentioned in my floor speech, the country of Sweden, where a lot of this stuff started with transgender surgeries and all this, they have completely backtracked. They've looked at the data and they realized that the stuff that they were doing was not reducing suicides. It was not reducing depression. It was not doing the things that the left always claims it does. And so I think that the fact is ours is the party that follows the science, and our science says, look, I mean, in middle school boys, I'm sorry, their hormones are raging. They do a lot of dumb things, and allowing, boys and girls' locker rooms, especially in middle school and high school, that's just, to me, it's ridiculous. I think it's something that, had to have been, it's unfortunate that we had to address this. I mean, this is something that, I'm guessing even Bill Clinton, when he was president, never would have thought this was an issue.
Well, it's the politics of identity politics and class warfare and division is what we see from the progressive left now that unfortunately has been in control of the Democratic Party. And as a father of two grown adult daughters now who participated in cheerleading, I assure you that I am not alone in saying I did not want boys in girls' locker rooms.
Oh, and I have talked to many parents, usually mothers, concerned about their daughters, and they have seen this. They saw this in their own schools. And this has become a concern for them. And that's what this is about. And this is, I think, the appropriate legislation. Do I expect the ACLU and some other leftist organization to sue? Yes. And I dare them to take it to the U.S. Supreme Court, because I'm guessing the U.S. Supreme Court will rule in our favor.
Well, and as you pointed out,
Or the state.
Well, sure. As you pointed out, teenagers are what? Well, teenagers are children. Science says the brain is not fully formed until you're in your mid-20s. So these are children who are, many of them can be confused. They have behavioral disorders, and what they need serious counseling and the right type of care. They don't need to be led down a path for abuse and to be used for political purposes.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, many of these kids have other issues that have nothing to do with gender dysphoria, but it's being misdiagnosed as that. And instead of addressing the underlying issues, they're glossing it over and I think making bad decisions. And unfortunately, and I feel sympathy for these parents who believe that their doctors have given them the proper advice, when maybe they should have gotten a second or third of opinion, or maybe done a little. And it's not even really the parents' fault. I blame a lot of the stuff on the medical community. I think they need to take a look at themselves and say, hey, wait a minute, what are we doing here? And we're actually starting to see that. And some of our medical associations are now looking at what Sweden and others have done. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, let's skip ahead now to something called the SCIP. That is the State Capital Improvement Program. And voters are going to be seeing this on their ballot in May. It's a 10-year bond program. I believe it's $250 million per year over 10 years. And what is that money used for if and when the voters approve it? And they have over the last several decades.
Yeah, it's basically the state uses the power of the state bonding, so we can get lower rates to basically front money so that townships, counties, and municipalities, local jurisdictions can use those dollars to leverage to improve infrastructure. What we do is we pay off the old bonds, and then we issue new bonds, and then those bonds are released. This particular SCIF is going to include an additional, I think, $650 million to try to make up for some of the inflation. The state of Ohio's bonding capability is great, so this is something that we, as members of the General Assembly, can put on the ballot for a constitutional amendment, which is going to happen next May. I suspect that this will pass the General Assembly before we leave on lame duck, and then those dollars will be available for localities.
Sticking with lame duck, do you think that there will be any movement whatsoever? Because certainly the governor has been supportive of making changes to what the voters passed with the initiated statute last November. That was State Issue 2 that legalized marijuana use. But there were certainly some concerns that maybe the language was backwards in a couple areas, and also this issue of Delta 8, which is sold over the counter. What's your thought? Do you think we'll see any movement, agreement regarding some common sense changes to that?
I would hope so. But mind you, we in the Senate passed the marijuana stuff a year ago, and it went over to the other chamber and has been sitting there for a year. We are now realizing that the hemp that's out there can also be turned into harmful chemicals that kids and other people can get access to. So it's an area that definitely needs to be regulated. I know, I believe leadership and I believe the governor would like to see it banned. I'm open to either or. I think that it definitely needs to be regulated at the least. And I would hope that if we get a compromise, given the fact that the other bill didn't even move anywhere in the other chamber dealing with the marijuana, and that was where we tried to move the money away from giving basically credits back to the marijuana industry, and instead use those dollars to help law enforcement and other entities combat actual crimes and other matters. I would hope that we could get something done in this lame duck.
You are also the chair of the Senate's Education Committee, and in 2023, at the start of this General Assembly, the Senate passed historic funding for K through 12 schools. Over the two fiscal years, as part of the 135th GA, $25 billion went to K through 12 schools. $14 billion and counting since the inception of the School Facility Commission, or the organization that builds new schools, and a per pupil average of $14,584. Yet we still hear school districts saying, even with this Fair School Funding Plan, which is what that was called, that they still don't have enough money. Are schools hurting for taxpayer dollars here?
No, they're not. They're sitting on literally billions of dollars of cash. They have actually a surplus, in aggregate, greater than the state budget surplus by about 2.5 times. So they're sitting on money that has actually increased over time. And I've talked to the Department of Education and Workforce about this. It used to be that their cash reserves were 10 to 20% of their annual expenditures. And that makes sense. And you don't want the school districts to be completely without cash. However, that number has increased substantially over the years, 50, 60, 100, 130% or more now in many of these districts. That is completely unreasonable. And when they go back to the voters and say, hey, we need more money, I think the voters are starting to catch wind that, wait a minute, you've got plenty of money. You just need to spend it more wisely, more efficiently, and put the money in the classrooms to help make sure that our kids are educated.
Well,
that's what needs to happen.
Yeah, the money needs to be tied to results, for one thing. What is your graduation rate? Can kids read in the 3rd grade? And so getting back to your point about what cash on hand that schools have, you can go to the Department of Education and Workforce's website and find their 5-year forecast for all 611 school districts around the state. So it gives a whole spreadsheet of cash balances and their expenditures. So I looked it up. Columbus City Schools, which just passed a levy last year, their ending cash balance of the 5-year forecast in FY23 was $244 million. FY24, it was $303 million, and in FY25, a forecast of $347 million on hand. That's staggering. And even I thought, well, let's look up Athens City Schools, more rural district, obviously. FY23, they had $17 million, almost $20 million in 24, and FY25, $21 million ending cash balance. So maybe voters should be asking, before I approve this levy, what exactly are you spending your current money on, right? Because in Ohio, remember, I know 10 years ago, approximately, when I started working here in the Senate, there were 9 state income tax brackets. Now there are only 2.
Correct.
So the state has done a remarkable job in
Absolutely.
reducing the tax burden, income tax burden, on taxpayers, not only on the individual, but also for small businesses. But a lot of the tax problems seem to be on the backs of local taxpayers and property.
Absolutely. In fact, what's happened is especially if you take a look at the suburban or rural, it doesn't really matter, urban, suburban, rural, but suburban taxes have gone to about, in most of the areas, especially here in the suburban Columbus area, you're looking at $1,000 to $1,500 per month in property taxes, most of which goes to the local schools. That is now also harming other levies. So you got levies for disabilities, fire levies, other things that are out there that are also needed services. But when you're now gobbling up a large chunk of it with property taxes, that is an issue. But as you mentioned earlier, the Fair School Funding Model. The Fair School Funding Model also said that it was going to be based on valuations. Well, valuations in Ohio have skyrocketed, and you have seen now a large chunk of the school districts go onto the 20 mil floor. So this is essentially, not to say free cash, but they will now gain dollars just because they're there and they're at the 20 mil floor, which means they will gain whatever the valuation increase is in their area, that percentage will go of those 20 mils to that increase. That's a windfall for those local districts. So when they're saying that they're low on funds or having problems, I would strongly question that. And I would, if I were the local taxpayers, I would be going to your board meetings and talking to your board members and even reaching out to your superintendent. Hey, what's going on here? How are you spending these dollars? I think that's very crucial.
Right, and difficult conversations come about when you talk about closing schools or moving on to a consolidated campus, but there are economies of scale. And these are some of the efficiency conversations that districts need to have with parents. And if you can sell taxpayers on, we're actually going to be saving money, not only on our energy costs, but this is going to be a safer, campus with modern technology. It's a win-win in many ways.
It is, and I'll use an example of Columbus Public, and I'm going to compare it to my own Olentangy, which abuts it. Olentangy's been a rapidly growing school district. They now have about 24, almost 25,000 students in it. They have around 28 school buildings for those 28,000 or 24 or 25,000 students. Meanwhile, Columbus Public, with around 38 to 40,000 students, has about 118 school buildings. They could definitely improve their transportation. They can improve, better hub and spoke system. They could do a lot more with a lot fewer buildings, and I think be so much more efficient that those dollars could then go back to their local taxpayers, or they could be put into the classroom and hire, teachers with better pay.
Sure. And speaking of, your Senate district, I looked up my old school district where I'm from in Washington County, which is Warren Local Schools. They had a cash carryover in 23 of a little more than $9 million, same in 24, and in FY25, $8 million. But one of the things they recently did was the schools that I went to, there were elementaries in Bartlett, there was an elementary school in Vincent, there was an elementary school in Little Warren, and one in Little Hocking. And it's, in the rural districts, it's a long bus ride. And these were older schools, same thing with the high school. And so they closed down the elementaries, and they came up with a plan. They sold it to the voters, and it's all now one consolidated complex, basically, where you have a new high school, and the elementary and middle school is like right across the parking lot. And it's been a big hit, and they do a great job educating students as per the school report card. So it works. It sometimes is a leap of faith, but if you plan, you can find the added value for taxpayers, and that's what you should be doing.
And exactly, and actually that is going on all over the state. Even my own local school district was doing the same. Their levy did not pass. However, they're looking to do the same thing. They're trying to continue to consolidate where they can and minimize those costs and reduce bus time. That is what all school districts should be doing. We are looking at some options, though, to maybe even consider regionalizing transportation, take it out of some of the local school districts' concerns. And if you talk to charter schools, charter non-public, even the traditional public schools, I think a lot of them would prefer to see some sort of regionalization. That might get some more standardization with all the school districts and local schools. It might make things more efficient as well and may be able to reduce some costs. And if we can do that, again, that's money that goes back to the taxpayers, or it could be used to, hire, better teachers or more teachers that are needed.
And final thought on education, it's always interesting to see the continued narrative about parents. Really, it makes parents the enemy from the organization and organizations that don't like the expansion of school vouchers, specifically the Ed Choice Scholarship that has been embraced by parents across the state. And oh, by the way, when you compare what the spending is for the elementary and the spending for the high school students, and compare that to what the average spending is public schools, it's actually saving the state money and empowering parents to make the decisions that are best for their children.
Absolutely. In fact, I tell this to people. I even tell this to school board members. I had one of them came up to me the other day at the Alliance for Schools. They had their conference, and she's like, well, this is just taking money away from us. But then you try to explain that an Ed Choice scholarship at about $8,400, especially where most of these kids are in school districts where we're spending not the 14.5, but we're spending 25 and 30, 35,000 per student. It's a substantial savings to the taxpayers. And it gives the parents the flexibility to send their kid to the school that is in the best interest of their own child, which to me makes no sense why you would be against that. Unless you have a vested interest in keeping money that may or may not be utilized in the best way for those same students.
The Coalition for Equity and Adequacy in School Funding that came about during the original DeRolf decision back in, what was that, 97, I think is when the lawsuit was. And then I think the original Ohio Supreme Court ruling didn't come out until, what, 98 or 9?
Late 90s,
yeah.
And then...
You know, it's interesting that they're still around, and clearly they just want all the money.
Yeah,
They just want all the money.
Well, and the final Ohio Supreme Court ruling was in the early 2000s. I think it was around 2002, so...
Yeah, but yet they still say, and,
Yeah.
and this is an important question that Ohioans, Ohio voters, and if you're active in your, school board meetings, you need to be able to take this information with you. Because somebody will invariably say, I hear it all the time still in the media, well, Ohio's unconstitutional school funding system. Well, no, it's been constitutional now for decades.
Yep.
Correct?
Correct. I mean, not only that, I mean, the sheer amount of money that we've increased the schools. The biggest issue that was DeRolf was, in fact, had to do with the school facilities and not having the money for that. Well, as you've pointed out, we've literally poured billions into that. But not only that, over the last many General Assemblies, even going back into Kasich, when we did have an economic downturn to start off his term, school funding has gone up substantially. And it's gone up even beyond where the inflation rate has been. So for the districts to say that they don't have enough money, they need to maybe take a look at their budgets. Now, we've had some inflation, and that has caused some issues, but I will tell you that, again, that was inflation that was, again, caused by the Biden administration, and had they not been overspending, you probably wouldn't have the problems we have today. So, fortunately now we have President Trump coming back in, and I think he'll help clean that up.
Yeah, and when the state Supreme Court released the case, the DeRolf case, more than 25 years ago, and then every General Assembly, there is a new school funding spending formula, and until somebody finds any of those formulas every 2 years, including the current one, the Fair School Funding Plan, until a court says that's unconstitutional, then you have that battle. But when it's passed, that school funding system is constitutional. Period.
Yep. And in fact, we've actually kept the same school funding formula over the last about 5 years. So I think people need to take a look at the fact that this was a school funding formula also asked for by the public schools. So
And the Democrats.
And the Democrats. They were the ones pushing for this. We gave it to them. We've been funding it. We've increased and updated the inputs in the last 2 General Assemblies. So those costs that have increased have been included in there. Now, it is creating a spiral effect that we're going to have to take a look at, and I think we will look at it in the next General Assembly, because you're getting a situation, again, where you've got school districts that are on the guarantee are getting a lot more money than they used to, and that's having an impact on the overall school funding formula.
State Senator Andrew Brenner, Republican from Delaware County, Ohio. Insightful as always. Great discussion. Thanks for your time.
Glad to be here. Thank you very much, John.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.